My son left the inheritance meeting and went straight to book his wedding with a gold digger. But when he tried to pay, every card failed, one after another. His gold digger lover stormed into my house screaming. But when the police arrived, everything changed. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Saiorse, and at 62 years old, I never imagined my own son would look me in the eye and tell me I was no longer welcome in the home I'd worked 30 years to pay for. The morning started like any other Tuesday. I was making coffee in my kitchen, watching the steam rise from my favorite mug, the one Terrence had given me for Mother's Day when he was 12. Back then, his eyes still held that innocent sparkle, that genuine love for his mom who worked double shifts just to keep food on the table after his father died. "Mom, we need to talk." Terrence's voice was different that morning, cold, clinical. He sat at my dining room table with Lennox beside him, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the wooden surface I'd refinished myself last summer. I set down my coffee and joined them, my heart already sensing something was terribly wrong. Lennox wore that smile she always gave me, the one that never quite reached her eyes. At 28, she was beautiful in that polished way that comes from expensive salons and designer clothes. Everything about her screamed money, which was ironic considering she'd never worked a day in her life. "What's this about, honey?" I asked, looking between them. Terrence pulled out a thick folder of papers and spread them across the table. Legal documents, estate papers, my will. "We've been thinking about our future," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Lennox and I want to get married, and we need to discuss your assets." The word assets hit me like a slap. Not inheritance or family finances, assets, as if I were a business transaction. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "You want to discuss my will?" "I'm 62, Terrence. I'm not planning on going anywhere anytime soon." Lennox laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Saiorse, darling, you're being dramatic. We just want to plan ahead." Smart families do that. Smart families. I'd never been included in whatever category she considered smart families before. Terrence finally looked at me, and I saw a stranger behind his brown eyes. The same eyes that used to light up when I read him bedtime stories. The same eyes that cried when he scraped his knee and only Mom could make it better. "Mom, I need you to sign these papers. Everything. The house, your savings, the life insurance policy. It all needs to be transferred to me now." The room went silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on my mantel, the clock that had belonged to his grandmother, my mother-in-law, who'd left it to me when she passed. Another woman who'd worked her fingers to the bone to provide for her family. "Now?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Why now?" "Because," Lennox said, leaning forward with that predatory smile, "we're planning a wedding, a real wedding. The kind that costs money. And we need security." I looked at the papers spread before me. Every document I'd carefully prepared over the years to ensure Terrence would be taken care of after I was gone. But they wanted it now. They wanted me to sign away everything I'd worked for, everything I'd saved, everything I'd sacrificed for. "What about me?" I asked. "Where would I live?" "There are nice retirement communities," Terrence said, his voice flat. "Places where you'd be around people your own age. You'd probably be happier." Happier? In some sterile facility, surrounded by strangers, while my son and his girlfriend lived in the home I'd poured my heart into. I thought about the mortgage payments I'd made working night shifts at the hospital, the overtime hours I'd picked up when Terrence needed new school clothes, the vacations I'd never taken, the dinners out I'd skipped, the small luxuries I'd denied myself so he could have piano lessons, baseball equipment, college tuition. "And if I say no?" I asked. The look that passed between them told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a request. This was an ultimatum. "Mom," Terrence said, and for a moment his voice softened just enough to remind me of the little boy he'd once been. "You raised me to be independent, to take care of myself. This is me doing that. By taking everything from me? By securing our future," Lennox interjected. "Saiorse, You've had your life. You've had your chance to build something. Now it's our turn." I stared at her, this woman who'd waltzed into our lives 18 months ago, and slowly, methodically, turned my son against me. She'd done it so subtly I hadn't even noticed at first. Little comments about how old-fashioned I was, suggestions that I was holding Terrence back, jokes about my modest lifestyle, my simple clothes, my preference for staying home rather than going to expensive restaurants I couldn't afford. "I won't sign these," I said finally. Terrence's face hardened. "Then you need to leave." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything I'd ever loved. "Excuse me? You heard me, Mom. If you're not going to be part of the solution, then you can't stay here. This needs to happen, and if you're going to fight us on it, then you need to go." I looked around my kitchen, at the refrigerator covered with photos of Terrence growing up, at the window seat where I used to sit and read while waiting for him to come home from school, at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals together. "This is my house," I said quietly. "Not for long," Lennox said with a smile that made my blood run cold. "One way or another, this is happening, Saiorse. You can make it easy, or you can make it hard. But it's happening." I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. At 62, I was being thrown out of my own home by my own child, the child I'd given everything for, the child I'd loved more than my own life. "I need to pack some things," I said. Terrence nodded, not even having the decency to look ashamed. "Take whatever you need, but don't take too long." I walked to my bedroom like a woman in a dream. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But as I threw clothes into a suitcase with trembling hands, as I heard Lennox's laughter echoing from the kitchen, I knew it was all too real. An hour later, I stood in my driveway with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Terrence watched from the window as I loaded my car, his face impassive. Lennox stood beside him, her arm around his waist, already claiming ownership of what had been mine. As I drove away from the house I'd called home for 28 years, I caught a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror. They were already walking through my home like they owned it, and I realized that in their minds, they already did. I had raised a stranger, and now I was about to find out exactly what that stranger was capable of. The Riverside Inn wasn't the kind of place I'd ever imagined staying. $59 a night, thin walls, and a parking lot that had seen better days. But it was clean, and more importantly, it was all I could afford now that I was living on my Social Security alone. I sat on the edge of the scratchy bedspread staring at my phone. 7 missed calls from Terrence, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was there to say? He'd made his choice, and so had I. The room felt smaller with each passing hour. I'd been here 3 days now, living off vending machine snacks and trying to figure out what came next. At 62, starting over seemed impossible. But lying there in that cheap motel room, something inside me began to shift. I opened my laptop, the old one Terrence had called ancient, but still worked perfectly fine, and logged into my banking account. For the first time in years, I really looked at my finances, not just the monthly bills and automatic payments, but everything. What I saw made my stomach drop. Over the past 5 years, I'd been supplementing Terrence's lifestyle more than I'd realized. Much more. The credit cards I'd added him to for emergencies had been used for everything but emergencies. Designer clothes for Lennox, expensive dinners, weekend trips to resorts I'd never even dreamed of visiting. I scrolled through months of statements, my heart sinking with each entry. A $500 charge at a jewelry store, $800 at some fancy restaurant in the city, $2,000 for something called premium spa services, all on my cards. All money I'd saved working extra shifts, denying myself small pleasures, living modestly so my son could have security. But it wasn't just the money, it was the pattern. The charges had increased steadily since Lennox entered the picture. What started as an occasional dinner had become a lifestyle funded entirely by me. I counted them carefully. 15 credit cards total. Some were store cards I'd opened to help him build credit when he was 18. Others were major credit cards I'd added him to over the years, always with the best intentions, always to help him. My finger hovered over the phone number for customer service. For a moment, I hesitated. This felt final. This felt like cutting the last cord that connected me to my son. Then I remembered his face as he told me to leave, the coldness in his eyes, the way Lennox had smiled when she talked about my assets. I made the first call. "Thank you for calling First National Bank. This is Jennifer. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to remove an authorized user from my account," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Certainly, I can help you with that. Can I get your account number?" The process was surprisingly simple. Too simple, considering how much power I was taking away with each call. Remove Terrence from this card. Cancel that one entirely. Lower the limit on another. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. 15 credit cards, 15 sources of funding for a lifestyle I'd been unknowingly supporting. All gone. I closed the laptop and lay back on the uncomfortable pillow. For the first time since leaving my house, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt relieved. The next morning, I drove past my old house. I told myself I was just taking the long way to the grocery store, but really, I needed to see it, to make sure it was real. Terrence's car was in the driveway, along with a white BMW I didn't recognize. Probably another one of Lennox's friends coming to see her new castle. I parked across the street and watched for a few minutes, feeling like a stranger observing someone else's life. That's when I saw them. Terrence and Lennox, dressed to the nines, getting into his car. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. He was in a suit I'd never seen before, undoubtedly another purchase made with my money. They looked happy, excited, like people who were about to do something wonderful. I followed them from a distance, curiosity getting the better of me. They drove downtown to the shopping district, to the part of town where I'd never been able to afford to browse. They parked in front of Cartwright & Sons, the most expensive jewelry store in the city. My heart sank as I realized what I was watching. They were ring shopping. They were planning to use my money to buy an engagement ring, and probably wedding rings too. The engagement I was financing but wouldn't be invited to celebrate. I sat in my car and watched them through the store window. Lennox was animated, pointing at different displays. The salesperson was nodding eagerly, the kind of attention that comes when customers aren't worried about price tags. Terrence looked relaxed, confident. Why wouldn't he be? He had access to more credit than most people see in a lifetime. Or at least, he thought he did. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I began typing, documenting everything I'd seen, the dates, the stores, the pattern of spending. I wasn't sure why, but something told me I might need this information later. When I got back to the motel room, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. My name was written on it in Lennox's precise handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature, no greeting, just a message. "Stop being stubborn. This is happening whether you cooperate or not. Make it easy on yourself." I read it 3 times, feeling the threat behind each word. Then I tore it into small pieces and threw it in the trash. That night, I did something I hadn't done since leaving my house. I called my old friend Margaret, who I'd worked with at the hospital for 15 years before retiring. "Saiorse, honey, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. How are you doing?" I almost broke down right there. Margaret's voice was so warm, so familiar. I realized how isolated I'd become, how much of my social life had revolved around Terrence and his needs. "I'm going through some things with Terrence," I said carefully. "Oh no, what's wrong?" I found myself telling her everything, the ultimatum, the papers, being forced to leave my home. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or outrage. "That boy has lost his mind," she said when I finished, "and that girl has her claws in him deep. I've seen it before, honey. Women like that, they know exactly how to manipulate a man. They find his weaknesses and exploit them. I raised him better than this," I said, my voice breaking. "You raised him to be kind and trusting. Those aren't bad qualities, Saiorse, but they make a person vulnerable to the wrong kind of people." We talked for 2 more hours, about work, about retirement, about life. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not just Terrence's mother or Lennox's obstacle, but Saiorse, a woman with her own thoughts and opinions and value. After I hung up, I sat in the dim light of the motel room and made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them for my house. I wasn't going to beg for my son's love. I wasn't going to let them turn me into a bitter old woman clinging to the past. But I also wasn't going to make it easy for them to spend money that wasn't theirs. I opened my laptop again and began making a list. Every automatic payment I'd set up for Terrence's benefit over the years. His car insurance, his gym membership, his phone bill, even his Netflix subscription. One by one, I would cancel them all. Not out of spite, but out of reality. If he wanted to be independent, if he wanted to make his own decisions about his life, then he could pay his own bills. I thought about the look on Lennox's face when she'd threatened me. The confidence in her voice when she'd told me this was happening whether I cooperated or not. She was about to learn something about assumptions, and about the woman she'd so carelessly underestimated. Tomorrow, I would start making more calls. Tonight, I would plan exactly how to take back the power I'd unknowingly given away. After all, I had nothing but time now. And sometimes, time is the most powerful weapon of all. It took exactly 72 hours for my quiet rebellion to make itself known. I was sitting in the motel's small lobby, nursing my third cup of their terrible coffee and pretending to read a magazine when my phone rang. Terrence's name flashed on the screen. I'd been expecting this call, but that didn't make my heart race any less when I saw it. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By the fourth call, I answered. "What's wrong, Terrence?" I kept my voice neutral, businesslike. "Mom, there's some kind of mistake with the credit cards. They're all being declined." I took a slow sip of coffee. "What credit cards?" "All of them. The Visa, the MasterCard, the store cards, everything. I tried to pay for lunch yesterday and nothing worked. Then today we went to look at wedding venues and—" "Wedding venues?" I interrupted. "That was fast. That's not the point." His voice was rising, taking on that petulant tone I remembered from his teenage years. "Something's wrong with the cards. You need to call the banks and fix this." "Why would I need to call the banks?" There was silence on the other end. Then, "Because they're your cards." "Exactly. They're my cards, which I've canceled." Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head, the slow realization that his unlimited spending spree had come to an end. "You can't do that," he said finally. "Actually, I can, and I did. But we had plans. Lennox and we've been looking at venues. We put down deposits. With what money?" "With the cards! They said the payments would go through in a few days. They're holding our spots. But now? Now you'll have to find another way to pay." I heard muffled voices in the background. Lennox, probably, demanding to know what was happening. Then Terrence was back on the line, his voice harder now. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're being petty and vindictive. Just because you're upset about the house doesn't mean you should punish us like this." Punish them. As if holding on to my own money was some kind of cruel revenge. "Terrence, you kicked me out of my home and demanded I sign over everything I own. Did you really think I was going to keep paying for your lifestyle after that?" "That's different. The house thing is it's practical. It makes financial sense. But cutting off the cards? That's just mean." I almost laughed. The audacity of it was breathtaking. In his mind, taking my home was practical, but stopping the flow of free money was mean. "How much did you put down on these venues?" I asked. "What does it matter? Humor me." Another pause. $5,000 each. Each? "How many venues did you put deposits on?" 3. We wanted to keep our options open. $15,000 in deposits alone. For venues I would never be invited to see. For a wedding that was being planned with money stolen from my accounts. "And what was your backup plan?" I asked. "If the cards hadn't worked?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, Terrence, you're 34 years old. What money did you plan to use for your wedding?" "Your own money?" The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. We thought. You thought you'd use mine. It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" More muffled conversation in the background. Then Lennox's voice came through, crystal clear. She'd taken the phone from him. Saiorse, this is childish. You're ruining everything because you can't accept that your son is growing up and moving on with his life. Hello, Lennox? How are you enjoying my house? This isn't about the house, isn't it? You moved into my home, convinced my son to kick me out, and now you're planning a wedding with my money. If it's not about the house, what is it about? It's about family. It's about supporting the people you love. You're absolutely right. It is about supporting the people you love, which is why I'm curious. How are you supporting Terrence? What are you contributing to this relationship besides expensive taste? I heard Terrence say something in the background, probably trying to get the phone back, but Lennox wasn't done. I contribute plenty. I contribute love, companionship, motivation. I've helped Terrence see his potential, see what he could have if he stopped settling for less. Less? You mean me? I mean his old life, living with his mother at 34, never taking risks, never growing. I've helped him become independent. By making him financially dependent on me, that's temporary. Once we're married, once we have access to the family assets, I repeated slowly. You mean my assets? They were always going to be his eventually. We're just accelerating the timeline. There it was, the truth, finally spoken out loud. They weren't asking for my help with their future. They were demanding my present. Well, I said, I hope you have a backup plan for the wedding, because the acceleration stops now. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anger. Pure, clean anger that burned away the confusion and hurt I'd been carrying for days. They hadn't just wanted my house. They hadn't just wanted my money. They had wanted to erase me entirely, to take everything I'd worked for and pretend it had always been theirs. The phone rang again immediately. I turned it off. An hour later, I was driving past the jewelry store where I'd seen them shopping. Terrence's car was in the parking lot, along with the white BMW. I parked across the street and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The doors of Cartwright and Sons burst open, and Lennox stormed out. Even from across the street, I could see she was furious. Her face was red, her perfect hair slightly mussed. She was gesturing wildly at Terrence, who followed behind her looking like a kicked dog. They stood by his car for several minutes, clearly arguing. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. She was angry, he was defensive, then apologetic, then angry himself. At one point, she threw her hands up and walked away from him entirely, only to come storming back when he called after her. Finally, she got in the white BMW and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving Terrence standing alone. He watched her drive away, then kicked his own tire before getting in his car and following her. I sat there for a few more minutes, processing what I'd witnessed. Then I got out of my car and walked into the jewelry store. The saleswoman behind the counter looked frazzled. She was young, probably early 20s, with the kind of forced smile that comes from dealing with difficult customers. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I hope so. I think my son was just in here with his fiancée. About my height, brown hair, with a blonde woman?" Her smile became more genuine. "Oh, yes. Are you the mother of the groom? How exciting." "Well, that remains to be seen. I was wondering if they'd decided on anything yet." The woman's expression faltered slightly. Actually, there seemed to be some issue with payment. They'd selected some beautiful pieces, a 3-carat engagement ring, matching wedding bands, even a lovely tennis bracelet. But when we tried to process the payment, none of their cards went through. How much were they trying to spend? The total came to just over $28,000. $28,000 for jewelry, while I was living in a $59 a night motel. The young lady seemed upset, the saleswoman continued carefully. She said there must be some mistake, that someone had sabotaged their accounts. She was quite vocal about it. I bet she was. "Well," I said, "I'm sure they'll figure something out. Thank you for your time." I walked back to my car, my mind reeling. $28,000 for an engagement ring and wedding bands. Money they expected to spend without even asking me. money they felt entitled to simply because they'd decided they wanted it. My phone, which I'd turned back on, showed 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. I could imagine the progression. Anger, then desperation, then threats, then false apologies designed to manipulate me back into compliance. That evening, back in my motel room, I did something I hadn't done in years. I ordered takeout from a nice restaurant. Nothing fancy, just a decent meal from a place that delivered. When it arrived, I spread it out on the small table by the window and ate slowly, savoring each bite. It was the first meal I'd enjoyed since leaving my house. The first time in years, I'd spent money on myself without calculating whether Terrence might need something instead. As I ate, I thought about the anger I'd seen on Lennox's face, the confusion and panic on Terrence's. They'd built their entire relationship on a foundation of my money, and that foundation had just crumbled beneath them. Tomorrow, there would be more calls, more demands, more manipulation attempts. But tonight, for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. I felt powerful, and I was just getting started. 5 days passed in blessed silence. No calls, no texts, no dramatic confrontations. I began to think that maybe they'd accepted reality and found another way to fund their extravagant lifestyle. I should have known better. I was coming back from the grocery store, carrying 2 modest bags of food up to my motel room, when I saw her. Lennox's white BMW was parked in front of the Riverside Inn, and she was standing beside it, looking completely out of place among the worn parking lot and faded paint. She spotted me immediately and started walking over, her high heels clicking against the asphalt. Even in her anger, and she was clearly angry, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, a dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "No, we don't." I kept walking toward the stairs to my room. "Yes, we do." She fell into step beside me, her voice rising. "What you're doing is destroying everything. Do you understand that? Everything we've worked for, everything we've planned. You're ruining it all." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned to face her. "Everything you've worked for? What work have you done exactly?" Her face flushed red. "I've been building a relationship with your son. I've been helping him grow, helping him see his potential, by spending my money, by encouraging him to think bigger, to want more than just this." She gestured around at the motel, her voice dripping with disdain. "This mediocre, small-minded life. This mediocre life has been paying for your designer clothes and fancy dinners for over a year. That's temporary. Once Terrence gets his inheritance—" "What inheritance?" I climbed the first few stairs, forcing her to follow if she wanted to continue the conversation. "The inheritance he kicked me out to get? The one I haven't signed over and don't plan to?" She grabbed my arm, stopping me on the landing. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "You have to sign those papers, Saiorse. You have to. We've already committed to things. We've made promises. There are people expecting to be paid." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. "Let go of me." She didn't. If anything, her grip tightened. "Do you know what your selfishness is doing to your son? He's humiliated. His friends think he's broke. His reputation is ruined. The woman he loves is questioning everything because of you. The woman he loves is questioning everything because she found out his bank account isn't what she thought it was." "This isn't about money," I laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the motel's concrete walls. "Everything about you is about money. Your clothes, your car, your lifestyle, your relationship with my son. All of it is funded by money you didn't earn." She released my arm and stepped back, her face twisted with fury. "You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've been through, what I've sacrificed. What have you sacrificed, really? I'm curious." "I gave up my career for Terrence. I could have been with men who already had money, who could have given me security immediately. But I chose to invest in him, in our future together." "You gave up your career? What career?" She hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough. I had opportunities. Modeling, acting. I chose love instead. Modeling and acting. I repeated it slowly. And these opportunities, they were paying opportunities? Contracts you actually had? Another hesitation. The industry is complicated. There are a lot of politics involved. So no, you had no career to give up. You had hopes and dreams, which is fine, but you didn't sacrifice an actual income to be with my son. Her composure was cracking now. The perfect mask was slipping, revealing something uglier underneath. "You're a bitter old woman," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You're jealous that your son found someone who makes him happy, someone who sees his worth. So you're trying to destroy it. I'm trying to protect what's mine. What's yours was always going to be his anyway. You're 62 years old, Saiorse. How much longer do you think you're going to live? 10 years? 15? And then what? The money goes to him anyway, but by then it'll be too late for us to really enjoy it." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. She was literally wishing for my death so she could get her hands on my savings faster. "Get away from me," I said quietly. "No," she stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Not until you agree to fix this. Not until you call the banks and put the cards back the way they were." "That's not going to happen." "Yes, it is. Because if it doesn't, I'm going to make your life very difficult. I know where you work, or worked. I know where you shop, where you go to church. I know who your friends are. I can make things very uncomfortable for you." I stared at her, this 28-year-old woman threatening a woman more than twice her age, and something inside me snapped. "Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality to you. The reality is that you're standing in a public place, making threats against a senior citizen. Do you know what they call that?" Her confidence wavered slightly. "I'm not threatening you. You're just what? Explaining how you're going to make my life difficult if I don't give you money? Sounds like extortion to me." I pulled out my phone and started dialing. "What are you doing?" she asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "Calling the police." "You can't do that. I haven't done anything wrong." "Haven't you?" I put the phone to my ear. "You grabbed me against my will. You threatened to harass me at my home and workplace, and you're demanding money. I think the police will be very interested in hearing about this." She lunged for my phone, trying to knock it out of my hand. We struggled for a moment on the landing, her designer heel catching on the rough concrete. She stumbled, catching herself against the railing, but not before her phone fell out of her purse and clattered down the stairs. 911, what's your emergency?" "I'd like to report a threat and attempted assault," I said, keeping my eyes on Lennox, who was now looking genuinely frightened. "I'm at the Riverside Inn on Highway 12. A woman is threatening me and just tried to grab my phone. Ma'am, are you safe right now?" "For the moment, yes, but she's still here." Lennox was backing away, shaking her head. "This is insane. You're insane. Wait until Terrence hears about this." "Units are on the way, ma'am. Can you describe the person who threatened you?" I described Lennox in detail while she stood there listening, her face growing paler by the minute. When I mentioned her license plate number, which I'd memorized during her previous visits to spy on my house, she turned and started walking quickly toward her car. "She's leaving now," I told the dispatcher, heading for a white BMW. "The officers should be there in about 3 minutes. Please stay on the line." Lennox reached her car and got in, but she didn't drive away immediately. Instead, she sat there for a moment, probably trying to decide if she should leave or stay and try to smooth things over with the police. The decision was made for her when 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing but sirens silent. She tried to start her car, but one of the officers was already walking toward her, his hand raised in a gesture that clearly meant, "Stop." I watched from the landing as they talked to her, then gestured for her to get out of the car. Even from a distance, I could see her body language change from defensive to scared to something else entirely. Something that looked a lot like panic. One of the officers walked over to me while his partner continued talking to Lennox by her car. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Are you the one who called about the threat?" "Yes. That woman has been harassing me about money. Today she grabbed my arm and threatened to make my life difficult if I didn't give her what she wanted. He took out his notebook and started writing. What's your relationship to her? She's dating my son, or was. I'm not sure about the current status. And the money dispute? I explained the situation, the demand that I sign over my assets, being kicked out of my home, canceling the credit cards. Officer Rodriguez listened without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Has she threatened you before today? Not directly. But she's been driving by my house, my former house, and I've seen her parked across from this motel several times. So, there's been stalking behavior as well. I hadn't thought of it as stalking, but I suppose that's what it was. We talked for several more minutes, with Officer Rodriguez asking detailed questions about the incident and the pattern of harassment. Meanwhile, I could see his partner having what looked like an intense conversation with Lennox by her car. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez said suddenly, looking up from his notebook with a strange expression. Did you know that Ms. Winters, that's the woman who threatened you, has outstanding warrants? I blinked. Warrants? For what? I can't discuss the details, but my partner just ran her license, and there are multiple warrants from other jurisdictions. Similar charges. Fraud, extortion, identity theft. The world seemed to tilt slightly. I watched as the other officer approached Lennox with handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. This isn't just about your credit cards, is it? I said more to myself than to Officer Rodriguez. No, ma'am, I don't think it is. As they put Lennox in the back of the police car, she looked up at me with such hatred that I actually stepped backward. This wasn't the face of a woman who was simply angry about losing access to my money. This was the face of someone whose entire carefully constructed world was falling apart. And something told me that my son had no idea who he'd really been planning to marry. The call came at 6:30 the next morning. I was barely awake, still processing the events of the previous day, when my phone rang. Detective Sarah Martinez from the county police department wanted to talk. Mrs. O'Brien, I'm calling about the incident yesterday with Lennox Winters. Could you come down to the station? There are some things we need to discuss. An hour later, I sat in a small conference room at the police station, nursing a cup of coffee that was somehow even worse than the motel's. Detective Martinez was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. First, I want to thank you for reporting yesterday's incident, she said, settling into the chair across from me. Your call may have helped us solve several ongoing investigations. Investigations? Mrs. O'Brien, Lennox Winters isn't who she says she is. Her real name is Linda Walsh, and she's been running marriage scams for the past 8 years across multiple states. I felt the blood drain from my face. Marriage scams? Detective Martinez opened a thick file folder and spread several photographs across the table. The same woman, but with different hair colors, different styles. In one photo, she was a redhead in an expensive suit, standing next to an elderly man in front of a mansion. In another, she was a brunette in a wedding dress, arm in arm with a different man entirely. She targets men from middle to upper middle-class families, usually men with some family money but limited life experience with women. She studies them, learns their weaknesses, then moves in for what we call the accelerated relationship. Accelerated relationship? Fast engagement, fast marriage, fast access to family assets. Then she disappears with whatever she can get her hands on. Sometimes it's just credit cards and bank accounts. Sometimes it's much more. I stared at the photographs, my mind reeling. How many men has she done this to? That we know of? At least 12 over the past 8 years. The amount stolen ranged from $50,000 to over $2 million. $2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. The man in this photo, Detective Martinez pointed to the elderly gentleman with the redhead version of Lennox, lost his entire retirement savings, $800,000. He died of a heart attack 6 months after she disappeared. I covered my mouth with my hand, feeling sick. Mrs. O'Brien, we need to ask you some questions about your son's relationship with Linda, with Lennox. How long have they been together? About 18 months, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And in that time, has she had access to any of your financial information, bank accounts, credit cards, Investment statements. I thought back over the past year and a half. She was at my house frequently. She was always very interested in family photos, family history. She asked a lot of questions about my late husband's life insurance policy, about the house, about my retirement savings. Detective Martinez made notes as I spoke. Did she ever have access to your mail? Bank statements, investment reports, anything like that? A chill ran down my spine. Terrence has a key to my house. He's always had one. And recently, he's been helping me with paperwork, organizing my financial documents. At her suggestion, I closed my eyes, remembering. Yes, she said it was important for families to be organized about these things. She said she was helping him become more responsible about financial planning. Mrs. O'Brien, we're going to need you to check all of your accounts immediately. Credit reports, bank statements, investment accounts, everything. It's possible that she's been gathering information for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. Should I call my bank? We'll help you with that. But first, I need to ask, has your son tried to get you to sign any documents recently? Power of attorney papers, beneficiary changes, anything like that? The will, I said suddenly. They wanted me to change my will, to sign everything over to Terrence immediately. They said it was for estate planning purposes. Detective Martinez's expression grew grim. Mrs. O'Brien, if you had signed those papers, you would have lost everything. Not just your inheritance. Everything. Your house, your savings, your ability to make your own financial decisions. And within a few months, all of it would have disappeared along with Linda Walsh. I felt dizzy. My son. Does he know? Is he part of this? That's what we're trying to determine. In most of these cases, the male victim is genuinely fooled. These women are expert manipulators. They know exactly how to make a man feel special, chosen, needed. They create an artificial sense of urgency around marriage and financial decisions. She pulled out another photograph, this one more recent. Lennox with a man I didn't recognize, both of them dressed formally at what looked like a charity gala. This was taken 3 months ago in Denver. She was engaged to this man while she was living with your son. His family lost $400,000 before they figured out what was happening. 3 months ago? My voice came out as a croak. She was engaged to someone else 3 months ago? We believe she maintains multiple relationships simultaneously, moving money between different accounts, different identities. She probably has several men she's working on at any given time. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what I was hearing. Detective, my son thinks he's in love with her. He kicked me out of my own house for her. He was planning to marry her. Mrs. O'Brien, we're going to need to talk to your son. Can you contact him? I hesitated. We haven't spoken since I left the house. He's furious with me about the credit cards. That might have saved your life savings, Detective Martinez said gently. If you hadn't cut off her access to funds, she might have emptied your accounts and disappeared by now. She showed me one more photograph, this one from a security camera. Lennox, Linda, walking out of a bank, carrying a briefcase. This was taken in Phoenix 2 years ago. She walked out with $600,000 in cash. The man she was engaged to thought she was making a deposit into their joint wedding account. I stared at the image. This woman who had sat at my kitchen table, who had eaten meals I cooked, who had convinced my son to betray his own mother. How do we catch her? I asked. She's already caught. She's being held on multiple warrants from other jurisdictions. But Mrs. O'Brien, we need to move fast on protecting your assets. If she's been collecting information for 18 months, she may have already initiated some transactions that just haven't shown up yet. The next 3 hours were a blur of phone calls, account verifications, and credit checks. Detective Martinez sat with me as I spoke to representatives from my bank, my credit card companies, my investment firm. We changed passwords, added security alerts, froze accounts that might have been compromised. The damage was worse than I'd feared, but not as bad as it could have been. 3 unauthorized credit cards had been opened in my name over the past 6 months. The balances totaled nearly $30,000, money that had been spent on luxury items, expensive dinners, and cash advances. The good news, Detective Martinez said as we wrapped up the calls, is that since these were fraudulent accounts, you won't be responsible for the debt. The bad news is that this confirms she's been actively working to drain your finances for months. And my son had no idea? Mrs. O'Brien, we see this all the time. These women are professionals. They know exactly how to compartmentalize their lives, how to keep their victims from seeing the whole picture. Your son probably thought she was just encouraging him to take a more active role in family finances. I thought about Terrence, alone in my house, probably wondering why the woman he loved had suddenly disappeared. He had no idea that his fiancée was sitting in a jail cell, or that everything he thought he knew about her was a lie. I need to talk to him, I said. Mrs. O'Brien, I have to warn you, this is going to be very hard for him to accept. Men who fall victim to these scams often go through a period of denial, even when presented with clear evidence. He may not believe you at first. I nodded, understanding. Terrence had invested everything in this relationship. His emotions, his future plans, his relationship with me. Learning that it was all based on lies would devastate him, but he needed to know. And despite everything that had happened between us, despite the cruel words and the betrayal, he was still my son. Detective, when you question her, when you question Linda, will you find out if she ever intended to actually marry him? Or was she just planning to take the money and run? Detective Martinez gathered up the photographs, her expression sad. Mrs. O'Brien, based on her pattern, I don't think she's ever intended to actually marry any of these men. The engagement is just part of the scam. It creates urgency, makes the victims feel like they need to act fast to secure their future together. As I left the police station, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief that I'd discovered the truth before losing everything. Heartbreak for my son, who was about to learn that the woman he loved had never existed at all. The drive back to the motel gave me time to think about how to approach Terrence. How do you tell your child that their entire reality has been manufactured by a professional con artist? How do you help them heal from a betrayal this deep? But first, I had to hope he'd even listen to me. Because after what I'd put him through with the credit cards, after the fight that had driven us apart, he might not believe a word I said, even if those words could save him from the worst mistake of his life. I sat in my car outside my old house for 20 minutes before I found the courage to walk to the front door. Detective Martinez had offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to do alone. This was between my son and me. The house looked different somehow. Maybe it was just my perspective, knowing that I no longer lived here, but everything seemed smaller, sadder. The garden I'd tended for 28 years was already showing signs of neglect, and there were newspapers scattered on the front porch. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. This wasn't my home anymore. Terrence answered the door looking terrible. His hair was uncombed, his clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. When he saw me, his expression cycled through surprise, anger, and something that might have been relief. "Mom, what are you doing here? We need to talk about Lennox." His face hardened. "If you're here to gloat about whatever you did to drive her away, Terrence, she's in jail." The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward, gripping the doorframe for support. "What? What are you talking about? Can I come in? Please." "This is going to be very difficult to hear." He stood there for a long moment, looking lost and confused, then stepped aside to let me enter. The living room was a mess. Takeout containers on the coffee table, clothes draped over furniture, the general disorder of someone whose life had fallen apart. "She's been gone for 2 days, he said, collapsing onto the couch. "She just disappeared. Won't answer her phone, won't respond to texts. I thought maybe you had done something, said something to her." "Sit down, honey." I took the chair across from him, the same chair where I'd sat when they'd demanded I sign over my life. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be very hard to believe." I told him everything. About the arrest, about Detective Martinez, about the photographs and the other victims. I watched his face as I spoke, seeing the progression of emotions, disbelief, denial, anger, and finally, a crushing sense of betrayal. "That's impossible," he said when I finished. You're lying. This is some kind of revenge because I asked you to leave. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos Detective Martinez had sent me. This is her in Phoenix 2 years ago. Different name, different hair color, but same woman. She stole $600,000 from her fiancé there. Terrence stared at the screen, his face pale. This could be anyone. This could be photoshopped. And this one is from Denver 3 months ago. She was engaged to this man while she was living here with you. He looked at the second photo for a long time, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. In the picture, Lennox, Linda, was wearing an engagement ring on her left hand, smiling lovingly at a man who wasn't my son. 3 months ago? His voice was barely a whisper. 3 months ago, she was telling me she loved me. She was talking about our future, our wedding. Terrence, the police think she was working multiple scams simultaneously. You weren't her only victim. He shot up from the couch, pacing to the window and back. No, this doesn't make sense. She loved me. I know she loved me. We were planning a life together, with my money. He stopped pacing, turning to face me. What? Everything you were planning. The wedding, the honeymoon, the house renovations she wanted to make, all of it was going to be paid for with my money. Did she ever contribute anything financially to your relationship? The question hung in the air. I could see him thinking back, reviewing their 18 months together. She was between jobs when we met. She was transitioning careers, looking for the right opportunity. What was her previous job? She said she was in marketing for a consulting firm. What firm? More silence. He was realizing, piece by piece, that he'd never gotten specific answers to any of his questions about her background. She was going to start working once we got married, he said weakly. She wanted to focus on planning the wedding first. Terrence, she's been using fraudulent credit cards opened in my name to fund her lifestyle. $30,000 worth of debt that I'm now responsible for. He sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. This can't be real. This can't be happening. I moved to sit beside him, the way I used to when he was a child and the world seemed too big and frightening. Honey, I know this is devastating. I know you thought you were in love with her. I was in love with her. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. I would have done anything for her. I did do anything for her. I threw you out of your own house because she convinced me it was the right thing to do. The pain in his voice broke my heart. This was my little boy, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly. And he'd been manipulated by a professional predator who'd seen his kindness as weakness to exploit. She used me to get to you, he continued, the realization hitting him like a wave. Everything she said about loving me, about our future, it was all just a way to get access to your money. The police think so. Yes. He was quiet for a long time, processing the magnitude of what had happened. When he spoke again, his voice was small and broken. Mom, what have I done? I kicked you out. I treated you like you were the problem. I chose her over you, and she was just using me. I took his hand, the way I used to when he was scared. You were manipulated by an expert, Terrence. This isn't your fault. It is my fault. He pulled away, standing up again. I should have seen through her. I should have questioned why she never had any money, why she was always so interested in family finances, why she pushed so hard for you to sign those papers. These women are professionals. They know exactly how to make their victims feel special, chosen. They study psychology, they understand manipulation. I'm 34 years old. I should have been smarter than this. Intelligence has nothing to do with it. Some of the smartest people in the world fall for scams like this because they're based on emotion, not logic. He sat back down, closer to me this time. How do you not hate me? How are you even speaking to me after what I did? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, who'd been turned against me by someone who'd seen our family as nothing more than a business opportunity, and felt my heart break for him. Because you're my son. Because I love you, and because I know that the man who threw me out wasn't really you. That was someone she created, someone she molded to serve her purposes. But I still did it. I still said those horrible things to you. Yes, you did. and that hurt me more than I can ever express. But Terrence, I've spent the last week being angry, and I'm tired of it. I don't want to waste any more time being angry. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the wreckage of the past 18 months. Finally, Terrence spoke. "The house," he said suddenly. "She wanted me to get you to sign it over because she was planning to sell it, wasn't she?" "Probably, or take out loans against it. The police said that's part of the pattern. And if I'd succeeded in convincing you to sign those papers, you would have lost everything too. Once she'd gotten what she wanted, you would have been just another victim left behind." He started crying again, deep, painful sobs that shook his whole body. I pulled him close, the way I used to when he was small, and let him cry out 18 months of manipulation and lies. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered against my shoulder. "I'm so, so sorry. I know you are, and I forgive you. How can you forgive me so easily? Because you're my son, and because forgiving you helps me heal too." We talked until well past midnight. He told me about the subtle ways Lennox had isolated him from me, how she'd planted seeds of doubt about my motivations, how she'd made him feel guilty for living with his mother, instead of proud that he was helping take care of me. I told him about the loneliness of the motel, about the fear that I'd lost him forever, about the moment I'd realized I had to fight back. "What happens now?" he asked as I was getting ready to leave. "Now you heal. You learn to trust your instincts again. You rebuild your life. What about us? What about our relationship?" I looked around the house that had been my home for almost 3 decades, at the photos on the walls that told the story of our family, at the man my little boy had become. "That depends on you. Do you want there to be an us?" "More than anything. Then we start over, slowly. We rebuild trust. We learn to be a family again. Would you consider moving back home? This is your house, Mom. It always was." I thought about it for a moment, about the comfort of familiar walls and the garden I'd loved. But I also thought about the small apartment I'd found, the independence I'd discovered, the strength I'd learned I possessed. "This will always be my home," I said finally. "But I think I need my own space for a while. I need to know I can take care of myself." He nodded, understanding. "But you'll let me help? You'll let me try to make up for what I did?" "There's nothing to make up for. But I'd like to have dinner with you next week, somewhere neutral. We can start there." 3 months later, I was settled into a small but comfortable apartment across town. Terrence came to visit every Sunday, and we were slowly rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't the same as it had been before. We were both different people now, but it was honest in a way it hadn't been for years. Lennox, Linda, was sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud and extortion across multiple states. Terrence attended one day of her trial, more for closure than anything else. He said she looked right through him, as if she'd never seen him before in her life. That was the worst part, he told me afterward. Realizing that I never mattered to her at all, I was just a means to an end. The healing was slow, and sometimes painful. Terrence went to therapy to work through the manipulation he'd experienced. I started attending a support group for victims of family financial abuse. We learned that what had happened to us wasn't uncommon, and that recovery was possible. On a Sunday evening in December, almost a year after the whole ordeal began, Terrence brought dinner to my apartment. As we sat at my small kitchen table, sharing a meal I'd cooked in my own space, paid for with my own money, I realized something. I was happy, not just content or getting by, but genuinely happy. I'd found my own strength, my own voice, my own worth, and I'd gotten my son back. Not the manipulated version Lennox had created, but the real Terrence, the one I'd raised to be kind and thoughtful and strong. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what? For not giving up on me. For fighting back when it mattered. For saving us both." I reached across the table and took his hand. That's what mothers do. We protect the people we love, even when they can't see that they need protecting. Even when they don't deserve it? Especially then. Outside my window, snow was beginning to fall, covering the world in a clean white blanket. It felt like a new beginning, like a fresh start for both of us. And for the first time in 2 years, I truly felt at peace. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites. And they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.